All right, let's get right into it. We tend to think of the Bill of Rights as this sacred document that was always meant to be. But the truth is, its creation was anything but a sure thing. It was a messy, brutal, political fight. Really, it was a battle for the very soul of America.
I mean, just listen to this. This is how some members of the very first Congress talked about the idea of a Bill of Rights. They called it whip syllabub, basically a fluffy, pointless dessert. Not fundamental freedoms, but fluff. That's not just disagreement, that's pure contempt. It just shows you how incredibly intense the opposition really was.
So, the Constitution was officially ratified, right? But the ink was barely dry and the country was already cracking at the seams. You had several states that only agreed to sign on the condition that a Bill of Rights would be added, and soon. Without it, the whole new government could have been seen as illegitimate. This wasn't just about adding some rights. It was literally about holding the new nation together.
Okay, so to really understand this fight, you've got to know the key players. We're talking about two warring factions that popped up in the very first Congress, each with their own champions. And this right here illustrates the divide perfectly. On one side, you have the Federalists, like Roger Sherman. He thought a Bill of Rights wasn't just unnecessary, but maybe even a bad idea. And on the other side, you've got anti-Federalists, like Elbridge Gerry, a guy so passionate about this that he flat out refused to sign the Constitution without those protections.
The Federalist thinking went something like this. Look, the Constitution creates a government with very specific, limited powers. So, why do we need to list out rights that the government has no power to mess with in the first place? They were genuinely worried that if you listed some rights, it would imply that any rights you didn't list were fair game for the government to take away. But the Anti-Federalists saw things completely differently. To them, this new Constitution created a powerful, centralized government that could easily turn into a monster. They demanded a Bill of Rights not just as a nice idea, but as an essential shield to protect ordinary people and to put some hard limits on federal power.
And then, into this complete firestorm steps James Madison. Now here's what's so fascinating. Madison was a Federalist. At first, he actually agreed that a Bill of Rights wasn't necessary, but he was also a realist. He saw these deep, dangerous divisions tearing the country apart, and he realized that crafting a set of amendments was probably the only way to unite everyone and save the very Constitution he'd worked so hard to create.
So, with Madison taking the lead, the whole debate moves to the floor of Congress. And it wasn't some simple, straightforward discussion. The entire battle really boiled down to 5 huge, critical questions that they had to figure out.
And this was the first and maybe the biggest hurdle. I mean, before they could even argue about what rights to include, they had to fight over whether they should even be opening up the Constitution for changes so soon after it was ratified. And you can just see the clash of ideas right here. You've got James Jackson, a Federalist from Georgia, arguing that even thinking about amendments was improper. He brought up that classic Federalist fear. If you protect some rights, you endanger all the others. And then on the other side, you've got Elbridge Gerry, demanding they consider every single amendment that the states had proposed, not just Madison's carefully selected few. This next question gets right to the heart of what the Anti-Federalists were so afraid of. For them, this was never just about things like freedom of speech. It was about power and it was about money. They were terrified of a big, distant federal government that could tax them into oblivion. And their ambitions went way beyond that. This is so crucial to get. The Anti-Federalists weren't just asking for a list of personal freedoms. They wanted to fundamentally rewire the whole system of government. They wanted to weaken the presidency, get rid of the federal courts, give states more power, all of it. So because Madison's plan focused on individual liberties and didn't include these huge structural changes, the Anti-Federalists were deeply suspicious. You've guys like Thomas Tudor Tucker accusing Madison of playing a political game, of offering up some pretty words just to, as he put it, amuse or rather to deceive people into accepting this powerful new government.
So you have to ask, how in the world did Madison navigate this minefield of hostility and total distrust? Well, it took an incredible amount of political skill and, a real belief in compromise.
Madison was just a master at the legislative game. He didn't try to force through the radical stuff the Anti-Federalists wanted. Instead, he focused on the core rights that most people could agree on, the ones that could actually get that 2/3 majority they needed. And he just patiently, skillfully steered them through a very reluctant House. And you can see how fast things started moving once that logjam finally broke. The House passes 17 amendments in late August. A couple weeks later, the Senate chops that list down and makes its own changes. By the end of September, a special committee irons out the differences. And then,
Boom! By October 2nd, a final list of 12 amendments is heading out to the states. It was a total whirlwind of political negotiation.
Now this is one of my favorite parts of the story, because it shows one of the most brilliant but often overlooked compromises. See, Madison originally wanted to weave the amendments right into the body of the Constitution. But Roger Sherman, the Federalist who was against the whole thing at first, he comes up with this genius idea. Hey, why don't we just tack them on at the end? This was a game changer. It kept the original document intact, which made it way easier for other skeptical Federalists to finally get on board.
But this story isn't just about Madison's clever compromises, it's also about the absolutely vital role of principled opposition. And that story is embodied by one guy, Elbridge Gerry.
So let's rewind the clock 2 years, back to the Constitutional Convention itself. The whole thing is about to wrap up, and it's Elbridge Gerry who stands up and makes a motion to add a Bill of Rights. And what happened? It was shot down, overwhelmingly. And for that very reason, he became one of only 3 guys at the convention who refused to put his name on the final document.
But see, Gerry wasn't just some crank saying no to everything. This guy was a major player. He helped create the Great Compromise on how states would be represented. He fought hard to limit the power of a standing army. His final, principled stand on the Bill of Rights wasn't just some random objection. It was the result of a deep, consistent fear of unchecked government power.
And here he is, in his own words. He explains his dissent not as some act of defiance for defiance's sake, but as his duty. He truly believed that the Constitution, as it was written, left the American people vulnerable, and he just couldn't, in good conscience, sign it.
This quote just perfectly captures his whole philosophy. It's such a powerful statement about civic duty, about standing by your principles, even when you are completely outnumbered.
So here's the bottom line. While Madison was the pragmatic architect who got it done, you could say Gerry was the stubborn conscience who made it necessary. His constant principled dissent created the political pressure that turned the Bill of Rights from a nice-to-have into an absolute necessity. In the end, his opposition actually made the Republic stronger.
And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? A question that echoes all the way from their time to ours. The story of the Bill of Rights kind of shows us that sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do isn't to agree, but to argue. Which really makes you wonder, when is principled dissent not just your right, but your duty?